Today we are discussing Emperor Titus from the Flavian dynasty, and we're discussing how he handled the eruption of Mount Vesuvius so well. We'll also be discussing his brother Domitian and the legacy of the Flavian dynasty. Welcome to today's video. For context, my name is Moray. I am a real woman talking about real history, and we don't use AI here. We are against AI. It's anti-AI generated. So welcome to Moray's Muse, and let's get into the video. Titus Flavius Vespasianus was the ideal emperor, and yet I barely see him get a shout out. As the second ruler of the Flavian dynasty, I think he did a very good job, but his brother Domitian gives the Flavian dynasty a bad name.
Wanker! You're a wanker! Wanker!
The Flavians, who ruled after it was the year of the four emperors, it was quite a bad time, you know what I mean? Like, the Flavian dynasty were quite a solid dynasty. The catastrophes he faced really threatened the state, and in the beginning of his reign, he had a reputation as being somewhat of a second Nero. However, he turned his reign around. So before we talk about how Titus handled the eruption of Vesuvius and some of the other natural disasters that happened during his reign, we need to talk about a brief background of what led to the Flavian dynasty and Titus's father, Vespasian. The death of Nero terminated a lineage that was legendary. You had Julius Caesar, you had Claudius, you had some of the most incredible empresses of all time. You had Augustus. It was legendary. And Nero's death, a man who is one of the most horrible emperors we have seen, it was a good omen. However, what followed was the year of the four emperors, a period of systematic collapse. And the year of the four emperors taught us that this divine legacy held by Caesar and Augustus and passed down to Nero didn't make an emperor. An emperor could be found anywhere. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, brief and bloody reigns. So when the Flavians come in, we see emperors gain the reputation that they come from aristocracy again. Vespasian, who was the patriarch, if we will, of the dynasty, Vespasian's father was a tax collector. So, you know, a tax collector, very rich. But also Vespasian had military legitimacy. So he had both. He had aristocracy and military legitimacy. Titus, Vespasian's son, is born on December the 30th. And Titus is educated in the palace. And he is exposed to some of the best imperial education from such an early age. Titus does his military service in Brittany and Germany. And Titus earns a reputation for bravery and cultivation. Before Titus wears the purple, we know that Vespasian was very famous for quelling the first Judean revolt. Titus was very old actually when his dad became emperor. Titus was 30 years old. Vespasian is proclaimed emperor of the legions of Egypt and Judea in 69 BCE, and Titus is in charge. He's like holding the fort. And Titus is 30 years old. And Titus, the 30-year-old Titus, is left trusted with the final, most brutal stage of the war. The siege of Jerusalem is a humanitarian catastrophe because emperors have to emperor, right? And that means the capture and the destruction of the city and the second temple being burnt. It was hailed as a restorative triumph for Rome. And Titus is awarded, along with his dad Vespasian, with spoils of war, including the treasures of the temple, which fund, can you guess what they fund? The Flavian building program, which includes the Colosseum. Titus actually becomes co-regent with his father. He's not just an heir, he is seen as a sharer and even protector of the empire, and he's appointed commander of the Praetorian Guard. But Vespasian did hire his son because he wanted Titus to do the dirty work of the regime. Titus was about suppressing conspiracies and overseeing executions of figures that could be a threat to his dad's reign, and therefore he's getting this reputation as a second Nero. He's also having affairs. His relationship with the Jewish queen Berenice, Herod Agrippa II's sister, is very controversial. And Berenice, we actually might do a video about her next time. She is seen as a second Cleopatra. People are really scared that Queen Berenice is going to be the new Cleopatra. However, scholars do say that he had a turning point in his character when he did dismiss Berenice. Vespasian dies of a sudden infection, and Titus succeeds his father immediately. Obviously, Titus wants to show he's the big boy when he wears the purple. And because Titus had a reputation for really bad cruelty, he halts treason trials to show that he has changed character. He declares that no senator will be put to death under his reign. However, whilst he showed that he was the big boy and that he was going to handle things very differently compared to his predecessors, a disaster happens. Mount Vesuvius erupts on August the 24th, 79 BCE. Now, I just wanted to quickly talk about the date for Mount Vesuvius erupting. So it's Pliny the Younger, who was around 17, and he saw Mount Vesuvius erupt, and he said it was August the 24th. And scholars have argued about this date, whether it was August the 24th or October the 24th, but there's a consensus now that Pliny the Younger was correct, and it was August the 24th. So in the movies, you can see that it's this big one-day event. It's a disaster, but actually the eruptions were like over a multitude of days. The thermal energy release was 100,000 times stronger than Hiroshima. Now, I never would have thought a Roman emperor would have been this person, but historians regard Titus's reaction to Vesuvius erupting as a landmark case of a ruler doing well at disaster relief. Titus establishes himself as a person who goes to the heart of disaster relief. He became restorer, and he went very much into protector mode. First of all, it was regeneration. He oversees high-ranking senators of consular rank to coordinate reconstruction, re-establish legal property lines, something very necessary, and providing long-term economic recovery. For the victims who had no heirs, he puts their legacy or estate into a special fund for the other victims of the disaster. Usually the property or the estate would go back to the imperial treasury, aka back to the senators. He instead used these wills for homes for the homeless, which noble of him, right? Like, another thing that's quite amazing, a lot of foreign kings wanted to get involved and private citizens, and Titus saw through that. He refused any sort of charity from those who could benefit. Having foreign interference is quite controversial because they can buy their way into the Senate. And Titus personally travels to the disaster site, surveying the damage and comforting survivors. He also gave perks and benefits to neighboring towns who had done their part in rescue, and he placed a huge emphasis on giving shelter to refugees. And yes, Pompeii slipped into myth. It was never able to be a town again, resurrected per se. It's now a tourist. It's now for tourists. But places like Neapolis actually saw the benefit of Titus's work. Anyway, Titus had done a very, very good job, but in 80 BCE, Titus is still in Campania overseeing restoration efforts due to Mount Vesuvius. And there's the fire of Rome. Not the one that Nero dealt with, but another fire of Rome. And this fire raged for around 3 days and 3 nights. A lot of Agrippa, so we've spoken about Agrippa, Augustus's best friend and the imperial builder. A lot of Agrippa's architecture got destroyed. However, after the fire, pestilence breaks out, so a virus. At the height of the epidemic, 10,000 people are dying a day in Rome, and Titus is in full-on restorer mode. Now, the Flavian dynasty is essentially a brand at this point because of how they built the Colosseum. Whilst his father started the construction, it was Titus who finished it. And Titus ordered mass entertainment. It was 100 days of games. However, it wasn't so good for animals or gladiators. 9,000 animals perished, and 2,000 gladiators died during that 100 days. Because gladiators didn't normally die. They didn't normally die. That's just a stereotype, like in the movies. Like, they didn't normally die. They cost too much for them to die. Titus even builds over Nero's golden house, and he creates a bathhouse. So he really is appeasing the plebs. It was a signal. Nero's private luxury was pasted over so that Titus could give to the people and give them a big, gorgeous bathhouse. Titus passes away age 41 after dying of a fever. He had reigned for around 2 years, and whilst historians conclude that it was malaria, very prevalent in Italy during the late summer, Cassius Dio, the younger brother of Domitian that we'll be talking about in a minute, offered to place his older brother in a casket of snow to help with the fever and then shocked to death. So yeah, in conclusion, Titus was a pretty good guy, but then again, I don't trust any of the PR that comes out of the palace. Imagine if you based everything you knew about Keir Starmer off his Twitter feed alone. Thank you so much for watching our videos, and we're just about to film one on Domitian, so bye bye.